Right. Can I start? But then I hear myself. But that's. Can I start? ما- مش مشكلة. مش مشكلة. Yeah, I think what we will do is I will just start with my introduction. Okay, we're moving to an online presentation straight away, so and we need to start. Okay, then I will put the headphones on. Okay, no problem. Thank you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, dear, I'm going to start. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, um, dear staff members, dear audience, dear participants online and on site, welcome to you all. It's a pleasure to be opening up the academic symposium of Giganet in this gorgeous building that none of you can see online, but it's a gorgeous palace of a building that is hosting us. We're grateful to our hosts who are doing their utmost best to make everything work. They're also talking very loudly. It's quite difficult for me to hear. Can you close the door, please? I suppose closing the door doesn't change much. Okay. We are here as part of the Giganet Academic Symposium. This is the Global Internet Governance Academic Symposium. We're yet again representing parts of the Giganet membership, the academic community. We've been here every year on day zero to provide our academic network the space to talk within the construct of the IGF. We're very happy that we're able to have this space from the IGF Secretariat to give some space to some of the discussions around some of the academic thoughts on internet governance. Since 2006, when Giganet was founded, we've been actively participating in these events. So we have a special bond with the IGF, and it's very nice to yet again be here in Riyadh to present our work. What I also wanted to say was that Giganet has been moving into the IGF proper. We have the IGF Day Zero event. We also have different events that we're co-organizing or organizing as part of the whole series. There will be 3 other events that will take place over the course of the IGF where Giganet members have been engaged in. I would actively also call on Giganet members who are on site or who will be on site in the coming days to join our WhatsApp group, where we will be able to communicate and share our locations if you want, or at least try and meet up more informally beyond the academic discussions. So the agenda for today, running a bit late, so I'll be very brief. We have one panel discussion, then we have a roundtable, and then we have a second panel discussion. We'll be starting off the first panel, which I will be chairing myself, with Roxana Radu, who will be giving a paper on which is titled Turning the Tide. We'll talk about, well, we'll give Roxana, who actually, due to exceptional circumstances, will be presenting online, the time to talk. Then we'll move to Sophie Hogenboom, who will be giving a non-systematic literature review on digital sovereignty as a paper presentation. And then we move to Maisa Amir, who will be talking about internet governance and power dynamics for the third paper. And then we'll move on to the roundtable, but I will then give the floor to Milton Muller to present that. So we'll do that later. But first of all, I would like us to start with Roxana. I hope, Roxana, you are online and you are able to get yourself on screen. Ladies and gentlemen at the back, is it possible to move to our presenter, online presenter? We don't have much time, so it would be gratefully appreciated if we can resolve this issue as soon as possible. We have Roxana's slides online. Do we have Roxana? You can see, Roxana, I can see you in the list of names, but I can't see. It looks like your camera isn't on. So if you could turn your camera on. As soon as you've done that, I'll be able to leave the floor and enjoy your presentation.
Good morning. Are you able to hear me now?
Okay, Roxana is ready to start.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, thank you very much. I still can't enable video, but I hope that's still all right. There is an echo. I think we're gonna get started even if I hope you can hear me in the
Roxana,
room.
the floor is yours. I'm going to put some headphones on and find myself a seat and enjoy your presentation. If you could please limit yourself to around 8 minutes for this presentation, that would be very grateful so that we can have some discussion at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamal. Thank you, everyone. I'm really sorry I couldn't come to Riyadh. I would have loved to be in the room with you. Unfortunately, there were visa issues, so I didn't make it. I'm just going to get started on this presentation. A year-long project that we've been conducting at the University of Oxford. For those online, I think there is a possibility to see my slides. I'm not sure about the people in the room, but here is an overview of my presentation. We'll start with a couple of thoughts on how ransomware as a phenomenon has evolved, and then go into the methods we've applied to look at 5 different case studies. We'll then go into some of the findings, both a framework that we have developed and some of the important observations from these different case studies. We'll talk very briefly about what is happening in the ecosystem at the level of cybersecurity policymaking and conclude with a couple of thoughts. And I hope I can do all of this in the remaining 7 minutes and a half. Just very briefly, ransomware is not a new phenomenon, but obviously it has been in the public attention a lot more, particularly since the pandemic started, so early to mid 2020. We have seen an evolution in the entire ransomware ecosystem, primarily because it has now turned into a service. This is an infrastructure that you can rent at the moment that can do quite a bit of havoc. We've seen cases targeting critical infrastructure more and more so, but we've also seen this trend to go for the most sensitive data out there, including attacking very vulnerable targets such as hospitals or education facilities. And if we look at what has happened in the last couple of years, it's fair to say we've had different forms of extortion made possible by ransomware, from the single encryption, which was more the story of the early 2000 all the way to double extortion with exfiltration of data, triple extortion, where there's also a DDoS attack following. DDoS stands for distributed denial of service. So attacks that send many requests to a server at the same time, making it impossible for the server to respond. And then we have now another form adding in personal communication with the victims. So taking the data of the customers and then blackmailing them for not releasing the data. So it's becoming a lot more complex. There are also entire networks that prepare ransomware attacks with very specialized roles within the network. You have those that just collect access. You have those that are in charge of distributing ransomware and so on and so forth. And there's always a percentage system. Part of the money will go back to those running the infrastructure. And with all of this happening, we've seen governments being caught a bit off guard. And I refer to this a little bit as a whack-a-mole game with the ransomware gangs. We've tried different things. We have been able to publicize more information about this business model. We've caught some of the people behind it, very few of them. There's still significant impunity in the space. And that's because most of them are based in jurisdictions that are outside of law enforcement reach, countries with whom we have no extradition agreements, and so on and so forth. So we can see that the phenomenon has only amplified, and the government responses so far have not done much to deter the cyber criminals from engaging further in this. We've also seen ransomware very high on the political agenda. This looks very far away now, but the picture on the right with President Biden and President Putin from 2021 was the first high-level summit that had ransomware as the main topic discussed. When they met in Geneva, after the Colonial Pipeline attack and a number of other attacks in the US on critical infrastructure, they had an exchange on reducing or limiting the number of attacks on critical infrastructure in the US. And for a little while, immediately after this meeting, there was a significant reduction in the number of attacks. It didn't last that long, and some of the groups that were immediately after this closed down by the Russian police then popped up again a little bit later. And of course, with the invasion of Ukraine, we've also seen first a quick stop on all ransomware, and immediately after an increase with all sorts of pledges and allegiance messages on forum published at the time of the attack. So it is a lot more political than some of the experts have claimed. Of course, there is an economic rationale behind it. These are cyber criminals looking for money, and they will target anything that has known vulnerabilities to them. So it's not so much about going after a particular target. Of course, we've moved into more valuable targets altogether, but it is all about casting a wide net and getting whoever is whoever is not prepared for it, has not patched their systems, and so on and so forth, rather than we're going to go after one particular target. And we've seen entire countries being paralyzed by ransomware, which is what generated this idea for the project. We've seen Costa Rica in 2020, after the attack by the Conti ransomware gang, being unable to do much in the coming month, and up to this day they are still recovering from this attack. So it can be extremely damaging. So in this project, we decided to look at two different research questions. The first one is quite basic. So how have governments been responding to ransomware since 2020, when the phenomenon has definitely shifted towards being the number one cybercrime out there? And the second one, and also tying this in with discussions in some specialized groups, is there enough evidence to suggest that we have now a shift towards active cyber defense, or if you wanted, fighting back ransomware with offensive capabilities? This is the second question that we were interested in capturing. And we're completing now the 5 case studies. We have 5 jurisdictions from Costa Rica on one side of the spectrum, all the way to Australia on the other side of the spectrum. And the spectrum really looks at defensive versus offensive capabilities. And we've also added in Singapore, the UK, and France. We've selected these cases because these countries have had a very particular stance to cybersecurity, and they also show that the levers pulled at the domestic level range quite a bit. Here we have a number of these changes we've observed over the year that are also well documented in the literature. One feature that is common across these case studies is the membership in the counter ransomware initiative. This is a coalition that the US has put together after the critical infrastructure attacks in 2021. And by now, it has around 40 members around the world. And here we've seen also there were moves to set up permanent operations to fight ransomware, some more successful than others. Then we've had an expansion of mandates of existing institutions, granting new powers to public authorities. So quite a bit of space there to act at the national level, in addition to potentially deploying some offensive capabilities to fight ransomware groups, disrupt networks, and so on and so forth. And we've come up with a framework to better understand what was happening at the domestic level, because we ended up with too much information. Not only have countries been in the process of reforming their cybersecurity institutions more generally, but they have paid quite a bit of attention to addressing ransomware. And they've done so at the technical, institutional, legal, regulatory, and political level. So it made sense for us to distinguish these dimensions. And as you can see, we've tried to put here a bit of a spectrum from Costa Rica to Australia. We've seen the capabilities of these different institutions to deal with the problem. Some countries are placed somewhere in the middle, because they are doing less than Australia, but significantly more than Costa Rica. So this is just a comparison across these different countries. And I'll just walk you through the results very, very quickly. I know we don't have a lot of time, but just to give you a sense of where we are with this paper. So in Costa Rica, we've seen a massive move to tackle 2 separate dimensions in this framework. One was really on the technical level, so looking at acquiring cloud computing solutions and at creating all sorts of peripheral protection tools for various ministries. I was saying before, they are still recovering from this attack, so this is work in progress. And I would say importantly as well, there has been a move on a regulatory level to try to improve Costa Rica's capability to access information about different incidents, but also to be able to report internally, something that has been accelerated because of the attack they were confronted with. But like many countries in Latin America, they don't yet have a full institutional setup to tackle cybersecurity. So this is work in progress. And there are a number of discussions currently in the government to set up what is needed. Part of that is a new digital transformation strategy, but also figuring out what kind of bilaterals might be helpful to avoid situations like the one they faced in 2022. In Australia, we're saying is at the other end of the spectrum. They have been very vocal about some of the measures they were pursuing, including specific task forces that would look at disrupting networks outside of the traditional borders of Australia. So that was one of the reasons why we wanted to include them in the project. Obviously, they've been at the forefront of some of the operations that included cyber capabilities that we would otherwise call offensive or active cyber defense. They've been also reforming their legal frameworks to allow or to make it feasible for them to disrupt networks outside of Australia. But this is all work in progress, and we've definitely seen a lot of investment in the signals directorate. As well as investment in preparedness of the systems, particularly testing critical systems. And there is a plan to establish a mandatory no fault, no liability ransomware reporting obligation, as well as a very close link to the private sector, and lots of discussions across different committees on how to strengthen the threat information exchanges. Moving on to France, we're seeing that there is a very different cyber posture over there. France has obviously aligned very closely with everything that the European Union has been doing on the topic, has even led in some of the cyber discussions. But domestically and legally interesting, there is the separation between what can be done on defensive missions, and that's one part of the government, the cybersecurity agency, but then there's also the offensive capability and offensive missions in the cybercom. And there has been stronger cooperation among these different institutions since 2018, but France has traditionally never attributed any cyber attack. So that internal distinction remains quite strong. There is also a provision that allows the state to carry out technical operations to characterize an attack and neutralize its effects, which is quite specific in the French legislation that we are now analyzing further. And within the international space, we're seeing that France has been not only advancing some of the cyber resilience frameworks put forward by the European Union, but also cooperating and being one of the key partners within NATO. So we are now looking at what has been extremely interesting in France with this focus on domestic industrial capabilities and the so-called digital sovereignty, or if you want, a strategic autonomy. France has definitely invested massively in a number of startups that are working on cybersecurity, but it has also invested in protecting better their own governmental systems. So this is a case that is somewhere in the middle for our domestic levers. And then Singapore, very interestingly, always given as an example for the work they've been doing on cybersecurity within Asia. There's lead from Singapore on a number of international initiatives. On the UN side, we have the OEWG led by a Singaporean diplomat, but also Their cyber security agency has been very active regionally, ASEAN, as well as the counter ransomware task force. They have been leading a few of the working groups there, so very much positioning themselves as a center of expertise and as partners you could count on in case of cyber attacks. We are exploring here a couple of things. So on the regulatory level, there is a licensing of cybersecurity service providers. There's a mandatory code of practice for critical information infrastructure operators and mandatory obligation to report payment that is currently under consideration. There's been quite an upgrade of the legal framework with the Cybersecurity Act from 2018, but also various additional elements that have to do with sharing information or even going as far as blocking access to online content if suspected to be used for crime in their Online Cyber Harms Act. So a number of related legislative moves that are making ransomware, let's say they're attacking ransomware from different sides, if we wanted to use this terminology. So we're seeing also moves to label different cybersecurity products, in particular for IoT, for Internet of Things. There's a vetting system that is very much used across Singapore for a number of devices. And technically, there are plans to implement a protective DNS, which is a move that the European Union has also endorsed with their DNS for EU. And a number of other plans to trace ransomware payments and act at different levels in the ecosystem to try to limit. We were reading in the literature a lot about empowering private actors to act on ransomware in whatever way they found justified, but unfortunately, that does not seem to be supported by the data we have on Singapore. So that's something we're still looking into. And then we had the case of the UK that I have not included here for brevity, which is quite close to what we have observed in Australia. Same type of approach to disrupting networks outside of the UK jurisdiction, as well as lots of internal support for active cyber defense. The UK has had for a really long time a posture in which they were cooperating internationally to go after different networks, but it has never been part of the national strategy to consider offensive capability. That is now changing. So some of the key findings, we've seen lots of variation at the national level. We've seen also increased centralization of responsibility for countering ransomware, and I think that is key. It used to be a decentralized business. Different parts of the government were responsible for different things. Now there is this move to, first of all, share more information across not only the state institutions, but also with the private sector and the other way around. And there's a clear focus on putting more resources behind fighting ransomware and also centralizing some of that responsibility. And on the question of how much of it is now on the offensive side, is that question remains unanswered fully, because our data suggests there's just a question of path dependency. Countries that have had significant capabilities all along, they are more prone to use some of that towards ransomware.
Sophie, if that's possible, I'm going to pass the microphone Thanks very much for your presentation. We'll get to Sophie now, and I'll try and work out how to get Sophie's slides on the screen. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jamal.
All right. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Yeah. All right. My name is Sophie Hogenboom, and I am a second-year PhD student, and I'm here today to discuss the project that I'm working on. I am interested in these are the questions that inspired my research. I'm interested in what does digital sovereignty mean in the European context. What interests me was the fact that we are now seeing state and non-state actors using digital sovereignty as a discourse. And I was wondering how we could study, how we could approach this social process. And so I went. I'm so sorry. Yes. So of course, as a good student, I started with the existing literature on digital sovereignty, and there's a few observations that have been made by others, and that is that there is quite a divergence between approaches that are state-centric to sovereignty and those who are not. And at the same time, there's also a need to have more theoretical engagement. Currently, a lot of the literature is mainly descriptive, and so I wanted to try to fill this gap. I've wanting to do this by exploring symbolic interactionist role theory. This is a theory that originated in the social sciences from the work of George Herbert Mead, an American philosopher and psychologist who wrote in the turn of the 20th century. And ever since, his ideas have been applied to international relations. And it also bears very strong resemblances with constructivism at large. According to Mead, an individual has a self, which consists. I'm so sorry. Can we go to the previous slide? You want me to? All right. For the sake of time, I'll just do it. Do it from without this. Just 1 second. I'm sorry. But I will just start talking because I know what's on the slide. So an individual has a self, and it consists of two parts, an I and a me. The me signals the ability of an individual to look at itself as an object. So it can look at itself by gauging the expectations of others. This has then been applied to the level of states. This is done by Holsti, and he said that states actually also have a role conception and have a self. They will also engage in what Mead would refer to as a role-taking process, in which it will enter into a reflective state and will try to figure out what is the best role for their self. So this can be the self of a nation, it can be the self of an actor like the European Union. According to Mead, this process largely happens unconsciously because we're just engaging in our normal life. But whenever we're confronted with a problematic situation, the self tends to reflect upon a new role conception that fits the situation better. After which, after this, an actor has come up with a new role conception. So, for example, I want to have a stronger role in digital governance, or I want to have a more regulatory role, etc. It will start to engage in a role-making process, and this is signaled by changes in behavior. So this can be engaging in new policy discourse, but also to commit themselves to new agreements. And then a really crucial part, which I think is really interesting in terms of digital sovereignty, is the concept of alter casting. It means that I can only have a role if this is also being accepted by others. So I therefore need to try to influence others. This is done by all actors. So, and that's why the slide of McCord, this quote of McCord he focuses on the fact that all actors are doing this. So all actors are participating in this role-taking process, in this role-making process, and in this alter casting process. So ultimately, the roles that all the individuals a social process in which these norms of sovereignty are currently being shaped. So I really had to go through these concepts very quick, but I do think that these concepts can be really useful to study both state and non-state actors, because we could apply this framework to both. In this framework, you would identify the specific problematic situation of an actor. You will then try to see how they were reflecting upon a new role for themselves. This is, for example, in the case of the European Union, often expressed by the interactions between the institutions, so the Parliament, the Council, the Commission. It really shows us how these actors are reflecting upon their role. And then after that, we should look into how they are actively making this role. And because if we follow the insights that symbolic interactionism gives us, it is expected that they will engage with this notion of sovereignty to either create a space for themselves or to reject a certain role. And then, of course, last but definitely not least, we should look at the interactions, because I think that this is the point that we're actually now seeing a social process in which these actors are interacting, which will result ultimately in what we would call norms of digital sovereignty. So just to conclude, symbolic interactions, role theory, and insight, I think, are very useful and can provide us with a really new perspective to study digital sovereignty. Its usefulness is also found in the fact that it can be used for both state and non-state actors.
And by doing so, we can deepen our understanding of the roles that state and non-staters have, and in which norms of digital sovereignty are currently being shaped, as I think that this social process is important not only for the digital space, but our society at large and democracy itself. All right, I really had to go through this presentation quite quickly, but if you want to read more about this, you can go to the website of the United Nations University in Belgium. My name is Sophie Hogenboom, and there I have a working paper in which I engage with all of these concepts. Thank you so much for your attention.
Still don't hear me? You hear me now? Okay, perfect. So, hi everyone. Thanks you all for being here. It's nice to be here. Today, I'm going to talk about internet governance and power dynamics, a theoretical framework of internet and platform governance in the Arab countries. So next slide. Thank you. The agenda, I will just give a brief description on platform governance models and approaches, background and disinformation, research purpose and questions and methodology. And finally, the preliminary results. Next slide, please. So if just to give a brief background about the platform governance approach, it's basically, next slide. First, we have the self-regulatory approach, where it's emphasized the market and the digital economy of tech companies with minimal governmental involvement. And it's primarily driven by the market and gives more autonomy to tech companies. And it gives more freedom for the companies to self-regulated, to be self-regulated. However, the criticism to this approach that the platforms lack the self-regulating capabilities as marketplaces, and considering the online problematic issues like hate speech, disinformation, etc., it appears that self-regulations has not achieved the desired outcomes. So relying only and exclusively on digital platforms to self-regulate is no longer feasible. And then next slide, please. So the self-regulatory approach is predominantly represented in the US, and then in the EU, it's more of co-regulatory approach, where the concept refers to more regulatory framework that includes the public and private sectors and more involvement of the government. Next slide, please. And then the third approach scholars refer to as a state-led approach. And this mainly involves more control from the governments, and the state as a regulator impose limits and constraints on platform activities and services. However, this approach has been extensively criticized for characteristics like control, cyber sovereignty, and dominance and surveillance over cyberspace. And then next slide, please. There was a research gap on the Arab countries and the MENA region that we don't really know which approach that is mainly we can describe or thorough analyze in these countries. However, the scholars have been working on this and just referring to it as control. The main characteristics is control. And so this was the main interest of this research. Next slide, please. Today, I'm gonna explore the case of Egypt, and just to give you a background about the trajectory of internet regulations in the Egyptian case. If we start from 2011, it was a phase of full openness, no regulations at all, chaos, if we, so to speak, power of social media platforms. Anyone can say anything against anybody at any time without any kind of constraints. So it was sometimes we described as chaos, but at the same time, there's no regulation, but at the same time, it's full openness and there's no constraints at all on speech on platforms. And then in 2014, there was critically changed, and then the regulations started to be more prevalent. 2016, this was the draft of the new media law, where for the first time, the digital platforms were included in the regulatory framework in Egypt. And then 2018, it was the start of the new media law came into force. And the cybersecurity law also, law 175 for 2018. And then 2020, this was the personal data protection law. And they are working on this law, and it's kind of the Egyptian version of GDPR in the Egyptian case. So in this research, next slide, please. In this research, I am interested to explore the regulations and internet regulations pertaining disinformation. So if we just want to give a brief description about the disinformation, it is, scholars have been linking disinformation to confirmation bias. It's just spreading false information with intention, rumors, fake news, malinformation, misinformation, deception. These are all overlapping definitions. And the scholars have been working on this phenomena, have been linked disinformation with truth bias, confirmation bias, users' tendency to spread what aligns usually with their political attitudes and beliefs. And also it was linked with conspiracy thinking at times, and other studies linked the disinformation to the spread of political manipulation, sometimes to the lack of trust in governments, for also sometimes political manipulations at times by the governments and political regimes. or the misleading advertisements, and the motivation for spreading disinformation could be based on financial gains or ideological or psychological on political grounds. We can classify two groups of the spreaders of disinformation. First, the individuals who deliberately generate false content and disseminate it. And second, those who unknowingly disseminate the contentious content without even know that it is disinformation. So my research question, next slide, please. My research question is, I'm interested to know what are the primary approaches of platform governance utilized by governments and policymakers in relation to content moderation and disinformation? And second, what is the role of the stakeholders like state and platforms and users? And third, what are the effectiveness and ramifications of the current policies to combat disinformation? And to do this, the methodology, next slide, please. To do this, I'm applying mixed method qualitative analysis, deductive and inductive analysis, in-depth interviews with participants, including policymakers, officials, media journalists, and media practitioners. And also I'm doing text and document analysis for the digital law, for the digital laws and platform reports, media policies and regulations pertaining disinformation, and also the internet regulations in general. So to have an idea about the preliminary results, this is kind of also, I am willing to include other case studies in the region for other countries, but I can also give some preliminary results about the Egyptian case. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Hello? Next slide, please. Thank you. So the preliminary result is conditional collaborative approach, state and platforms together upon issuing complaints, legal measures, and also local law violations. And there's also state direct interventions, and this based on unregistered website, for example, from administrative point of view. Or they can also, there's a direct intervention, which I call it decision-making power, and indirect decision-making power pertaining harmful contents, for example, defamation and rumors. And at the same time, there is some ratifications like no differentiation between misinformation and disinformation in laws and policies. And at the same time, I am emphasizing that regulations are essential, but with protected free speech. This is very important. And one of the recommendations is a multilateral governance approach, governments and platforms, but also including independent institutions to oversee the process. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen.
And they took only 8 minutes.
So they were talking to like what you finished. But now everything has gone down. Everything has gone down.
I had my timer and it was just 8 minutes, but maybe because we start late.
Yeah, no, but that's not your fault.
Yeah, I know. Technical problem.
Yes, nobody.
I
nobody
thought because
told you
it's
to stop.
11, so they have to finish. A lot of stress today, right?
So right. Are we working? Is everything working? Sorry, excuse me. Is this working? Are we connected? Is it working? It's my question. No. Yeah, but I need to know whether we're actually online or not because we're running late now. Oh, sorry, everybody online. You heard me get upset. They can hear me online. Okay, right, ladies and gentlemen. We had 3 presentations. It's really a bit difficult to understand if everybody in the room can hear me or not. You can hear me in the room, right? Good. I online can also hear me. Thank you very much to the 3 presenters. I have some points and I'm sure that there are some questions, and I feel that if it's okay with you, Milton, who will be starting the next section, I can see Alyssa is just outside, so I will be the discussant now. I will start with the list of things, but I just want to see in the room, are there people that have questions about the presentations that we had? Or maybe I will start by triggering some thoughts. Okay, you please put your headphones on so that you can, and can you hear me? Okay, you can hear me. It's just, I don't need the headphones to hear me. I know that when I was sitting at the back, I couldn't hear unless I had the headphones on. So actually there's more silicon than carbon in the room. There's a huge number of computers and screens and technology that are helping us get through this event. There's also quite a lot of noise, but I do have some points that I'd like to raise from the different presentations. So I'll start initially with Roxana, and I hope you're still online with us. Once I found my notes, I will. Right. Okay. Anyway, Roxana, your presentation on ransomware was very interesting, stimulating us to think about this one particular. Yeah, I can't find my notes, but I can remember what I wrote. Stimulating us to think about one particular way in which governments are having to deal with a certain type of threat. Right. One of the things that struck me, you mentioned, of course, that countries are being held to ransom. It reminds been happening in public infrastructure in the Netherlands with the Dutch universities, and particularly the University of Maastricht, which had been held to ransom, and they'd dealt with this in a slightly different way. We're still not sure exactly how they dealt with it, but we do know that it was in a slightly different way. I wanted to ask, you looked at different countries in your response, but I'm quite aware that the European Union is doing quite some work in this area. And that made me think about the different types of actors that are engaged. You talked about the Biden administration launching a coalition against ransomware. I'm wondering what kind of actors are involved in these frameworks. Are these just the states, or are these also different private sector actors? Right. I have quite a few other questions for you, but they're all written on my sheet of paper, which is probably still in my pile. Once I've gone through the other list of comments for the other presenters, I'll get back to you on those because I'll have some time to find my notes. Right. For Sophie, this is not an unfamiliar topic to me, but I still have some questions for you, and maybe also just thinking about the type of paper that you were presenting here, which gives us a different type of insight into the way in which we can think about digital sovereignty. I think you've seen, or we've seen in a lot of the literature that looks at digital sovereignty, attempts to try and work out how to understand, how to contextualize, how to really position this concept. But what that has led to is also a lot of, in a sense, attempts to describe digital sovereignty without going into this kind of conceptual reflection. What I think your paper does, what I think your piece does, rather than let's think of it as a piece, it sets the basis for a longer project in understanding digital sovereignty, right? And of course, you know what I mean by that, right? But I think that that's the role of this, is to actually position yourself in that space. Um, One thing I was thinking in terms of trying to understand how to actually turn this into a more concrete article type of piece was actually to link to some of the other reflections that have been carried out on thinking about the literature and digital sovereignty. Obviously, you're you're presenting this is so funny. You're presenting a slightly different take on this, looking at work of George Mead and thinking about how symbolic interactionist role theory comes in. But there have been others that have tried to understand, to map out where the literature lies. And I think one of the things that might be interesting is for you to do that initial exercise to then actually say why this body of work actually contributes to that discussion on digital sovereignty, because a lot of what you've been doing is looking at how this relates to the work on sovereignty, right? And of course, then in your paper, you try and make the case for the digital, but that would be nice to do in the context of the other bodies of literature. So I'm thinking that one of the things might be to just kind of do a kind of a more bibliometric type survey to show where this theory then, or this body of theorizing, fits into that debate. That's one comment, and I'm sure there are many other questions. Maisa, thank you very much for your presentation. It's really interesting. You frame your work as a reflection on platform governance in the Arab world, but you talk about Egypt in specific. I'm wondering how much of Egypt is actually a case for the rest of the Arab world. That might be something interesting to reflect on. Another thing that really triggered me, at least thinking about the work that you did when you started presenting these different types of models, I was also interested to see that you break them into self, co, and state-led models. I'm not sure that given the current trends in European governance, whether you would like to see the European model as being the co-regulatory model, or whether it's more leading, moving eastwards, let's say, to a different type of model. I'm not sure about that, but what I was thinking was, have you looked into the literature of people like O'Hara, who wrote this book called The Four Internets? Right? I don't know if you're familiar with that work. That might be a very useful work to actually give you some insight into that. And also thinking about the work of Anu Bradford, looking at digital empires, of course. I was particularly interested in you wanting to focus on the Middle East region. A colleague of ours, Sophie's and mine at the UNU, in Bruges, called Mauro Sant'Agnello, he actually started doing a study looking at the digital sovereignty discourse in the Middle East and found very little material to actually work on. So it's actually quite interesting that you are able to get those insights, and it would be, I think, very interesting for you to talk to him. He was looking more at the cybersecurity angle of things, but his reflections in that space also needed, he found that there was very little that was being thought about in that space. And so I found it funny that you said, oh, the Middle Eastern model is just the word control. Right? So I think that that's something that could evolve in the way that you frame this kind of research. Right? So it's not really a question, it's more a suggestion, but I would be very interested to know if Egypt, for example, is very comparative to or comparable to other countries in the Middle East, or are there different types of regimes? I think this evening, after the roundtable, Monica will be talking about a country a bit further to the east and their policies in this space and how they govern the platform. So there's quite some stuff there. Right. Would you like to respond to the questions? I would suggest that you do that in the positions that you're in. If there are any other questions from the audience, we'll take 1.5 questions when we've given the answers. Roxana, you're up. Can you please unmute her? Then now she's unmuted. Ah, okay, she doesn't want to comment. Okay.
Ich glaube, es ist 10 nach.
Thank you. You hear me, right? Thank you so much, Jamal, for the suggestions and the comments. Of course, you're absolutely right. The social political aspect is really, really important, and it's different within the Arab countries. Like we cannot say one approach fit all, but in order to know this, I'm willing to do further case studies, and then I can group them maybe depending on the commonalities or differences. And then it will absolutely important to take it from this lens. And regarding Anna Bradford, the Digital Empire, she did brilliant work. Of course, I read her work, and also the other scholars on classifying these different approaches. But I read some literature, and yes, it is very little. It's not much. But this little material I read, that they just describe this this like they put it in one bulk, like it is control approach. But it is, as you said, there is differences between within the different Arab countries. In, for example, depending on the digital economy, depending on the GDP, the services, the internet infrastructure, there's a lot of things that we can build upon. So this was like, I'm exploring the case of Egypt, but I'm willing to do other case studies in the future. It is already planned. And thank you for your suggestion to put me in contact with your colleague. And definitely we can, I can share with him my work and the data and everything. Thank you so much.
Did you want to say anything? Okay. Are there any questions from the floor? We do give the due respect that we need to our panelists who are coming up next. We have 4 days ahead of us here to continue the discussions, and I hope we will do so in that space. So thank you very much to our presenters once again. Milton, would you like to take the floor and introduce this session, or? Okay, thank you very much. What I would prefer to do is, could you hold the question until after the next session, because we're already 12 minutes late, and I don't want to offend our invitees anymore. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, congratulations to everybody.
Yeah, they're both.
We need one more chair. There. So greetings, everybody. This is and kind of an open debate. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me? No?
I can hear you.
Right. You can hear me? Okay. So I am Milton Mueller. I'm a professor at the Georgia Institute of Technology in the US. We have here Elisa Heaver. Are you still with the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs? The Economic Affairs, the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs. And we have someone who almost needs no introduction, the famous Wolfgang Kleinwachter, who is a emeritus professor now, but has been an active participant in internet governance circles from the very beginning. So what we want to discuss today is the concepts and controversies around the concept of multi-stakeholderism. I think I sort of started this debate by issuing a challenge to the notion. And I have to say that from the very beginning, when we were in the World Summit on the Information Society together, Wolfgang and I have not been happy with multi-stakeholder as a word that describes the form of governance that we thought we were trying to defend in the period of the late 90s and early 2000s. And what was my critique of multi-stakeholderism? It was, number one, it does not really describe a governance model. It describes sort of lots of people participating, but it doesn't tell you what is being governed, and it doesn't tell you what is the governance structure, and it doesn't tell you what the authority is. And so I represented multi-stakeholderism as kind of a rhetorical solution to the problem of the clash of governmental and non-governmental forms of governance that occurred at the World Summit back in the early 2000s. And this concept of multi-stakeholderism made it easier for the established sovereign system of international governance to accept innovations like ICANN, the regional internet registries, and other forms of governance that were emerging for the internet at that time. So in my view, the key differentiating characteristic of what people want to call multi-stakeholderism was not the multiple stakeholders, it was that it was governance by non-state actors, that we were going outside the sovereign system and turning over governance authority to the internet community itself. And so I preferred the term internet self-governance. But when we did the transition, the IANA transition in 2016, I think the word that was frequently used was, the people said, who are you transferring authority to? And the answer was to the global internet community, that we were creating our own system of governance for our own community. Now, many people have interpreted this as me being against multi-stakeholderism, and this is a kind of a level of confusion of the debate that I think Alex Klimbard has introduced. It's like he's presenting me as if I'm against these internet institutions. Everybody who knows me knows that I'm a big supporter of those internet institutions and their model. I just want us to understand what they really are and not have this vague label. And one of the reasons I think we need to have a better label is that we can see the term multi-stakeholder being adopted by almost anybody now. All right, so the UNESCO says it's a multi-stakeholder organization, but it's an intergovernmental organization. It is fully embedded in the sovereign system. It does not share authority with non-state actors. The ITU sometimes likes to call itself a multi-stakeholder institution. And in fact, anybody really can sort of adopt that term and say, oh, we're inviting you to participate, but they may not actually be sharing authority, and they may not be actually giving you any power. So that's why I think we need to rebrand. Now, I think one of the things that makes people uncomfortable about my position is, in fact, that we have invested so much equity in the label multi-stakeholder, that was the brand that we used to fight off, attempts by authoritarian countries or the ITU to incorporate these private sector-based institutions into the intergovernmental system. And so this was often framed as a fight between multi-stakeholder versus what? What was it a fight against? It was a fight against the sovereign control of the internet. So I just want us to be clear about what it is. I don't want to oppose the existence of these institutions. I don't want to bring them down. I certainly don't want to incorporate them into the international intergovernmental regime. I want us to recognize that they represent an innovative departure from sovereign state-based governance. So let me just now turn the discussion over. Do we want to start with Elisa or with Wolfgang?
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me, and also good to hear that Milton has a little bit differentiated his position. He first gave in his speech in the Hague conference. I think it was in May this year, when he said it's the right time to give the multi-stakeholderism a goodbye kiss, if I remember. And he called the word the Net Mondial +10 conference, which took place in end of April 2024, the funeral of the multi-stakeholderism. So I have a different position. My position is that I see the Net Mondial +10 conference was the start of a new beginning of the multi-stakeholder approach. And I see it also, you know, the emergence of this terminology a little bit different from how Milton has presented it. Because in my eyes, I was inside these processes in the United Nations when this started in 2002, 4 years after ICANN was established. And there was a story before ICANN. And, you know, I see two sources for the emergence of what was called the multi-stakeholder approach or the multi-stakeholder concept. The first goes back more theoretically to the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, when people realized there will be global problems which go beyond the national territory-based concept of national sovereignty, like environment, like energy, like development, like war and peace. And so, and at the same time, we did see the growing role of non-state actors, both business and NGOs. So it was when David Bell wrote his famous piece and Alvin Toffler spoke about the power shift. So the power shift says, okay, we see a shift from national centralized governments to non-state actors. And Joe Nye from Harvard University presented a very good picture, and he said, okay, central governments, national governments will not disappear, but they are surrounded by a lot of more and other players. So this was the theoretical concept in the 90s, before the dot-com boom started, and before we did see the emergence of ICANN and the World Summit on the Information Society. So that means ICANN, when it was established in 1998, it countered a proposal by the ITU, which was, by the way, triggered by John Postel, which was the so-called ITU ad hoc committee on new GTLDs. And this was a memorandum of understanding, which was signed both by two intergovernmental organizations, ITU and WIPO, by two technical organizations, it was SIANA and the IETF, and by a business organization, the IATA. So, and when they signed the ITU memorandum, the Secretary General of the ITU said, okay, this is a turning point in international law in history. For the first time, we see a collaboration between intergovernmental organizations and non-governmental organizations. But the US was not satisfied with that and said, we need private sector leadership. And they pushed for a purely private organization, which later became ICANN. And the US government understood that the governments have to play a role, and they did put governments in a governmental advisory committee. So, and with this history, we came to the World Summit on the Information Society, where we had two different approaches. One was by the US government, which said, you know, private sector leadership is the best thing for the governance, for the internet. And the Chinese government, which argued, okay, private sector leadership was good for 1 million internet users, but for 1 billion internet users, we need now governmental leadership. So it was private sector leadership versus governmental leadership. This conflict could not be settled. That's why Kofi Annan, at this time, the Secretary General of the United Nations, established a working group, the so-called WCIG, Working Group on Internet Governance, where I was a member, and we had 2 years' time to settle this conflict between private sector leadership and governmental leadership. So, and the compromise we proposed to the Tunis summit was, the internet does not need leaders. The internet is such a complex system, and we see a growing complexity. It needs a collaboration of all stakeholders, where all stakeholders have to collaborate hand in hand in their respective roles. The best thing is on equal footing, but equal footing did not appear in the final text. So, and this was the moment when the multi-stakeholder approach was presented as an alternative to a one-stakeholder approach, because governmental leadership was one stakeholder approach, private sector leadership also one stakeholder approach. And we argued in the WCAG, there are even more than private sector and governments. We have also civil society, we have the academic and technical community, there are other stakeholders, and what we need if we want to come to solutions in the internet governance ecosystem, we need the engagement of all stakeholders. So, and this was more or less the implementation of what Kofi Annan has called upon the working group on internet governance when we had the first meeting. And he said, okay, the internet is an innovation in technology. What we need now is innovation in policy making. And so the multi-stakeholder approach was seen as such an innovation for policy making. So this was the source. I always was against the ism, multi-stakeholderism, because I've grown up in an Eastern country, so we had a battle between socialism and capitalism, and all these isms are misleading. So the multi-stakeholder concept is an approach how to settle problems. And the answer is, if we want to settle problems in this internet governance system, we need the involvement of all stakeholders in their respective roles. The best thing, as I said, on equal footing, but it depends from the issue. The involvement of the stakeholders will be different in the field of cybersecurity or in the management of the domain name system. Will be different in the field of digital trade than if we talk about human rights. And so it's a very complex system. It's not an ism. It's not just a religion. It's an approach. Thank you. And sorry for being too long.
No. Wolfgang is based. My approach is to for governance. Hello, can you hear me? It's shaky. How's this? Is that better? Okay.
Can you close the doors?
Yeah, that doesn't make any difference, but we can close the doors. It might help a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you for letting the government be part of this conversation as well.
Right. So anyway, if I would summarize the difference so far between his perspective and mine, it is that he is saying that it's a blend of it's a compromise between private sector led and state led governance, right?
Sorry, I didn't really catch the question because my audio was cutting off. So could you repeat it?
Yes. Can you hear it now?
Yes.
Okay. So he thinks that the multi-stakeholder describes a kind of indeterminate blend of private sector and public sector or state-led governance. And I'm saying, what really distinguishes the internet institutions is that they are on the private sector side.
Well, I don't think that all the internet institutions are on the private side. I think the most of the institutions are, if we take ICANN, for example, it's not only private sector that is active there. It's also governments. It's also academia. It's also it is also the business community.
Means
Yeah, sorry. So I think it's all different types of stakeholders, different types of views that are there, and they, so to say, come together in the and decide upon the different issues that are ahead of them. And so I wouldn't put it that binary that the internet either should be governed by the private sector or governed by governments. It's much broader than that, obviously.
I'm not talking about the participation. I'm talking about the authority. The authority to make policy decisions for the domain name system is entirely in the hands of a private California nonprofit public benefit corporation. Of course, governments participate through the GAC, and that's fine with me. Of course, private sector, when I say private sector, I also mean civil society, basically any non-state actor. But fundamentally, the governance authority is held by a nonprofit private corporation.
Yeah, but I do think that we, well, we saying governments, have agreed upon this model, or the way that ICANN is structured, to to a certain extent give up some rights as governments to fully regulate the domain name system. We have seen that that governments aren't the entity that should be unilaterally or be governing domain names or the whole DNS. We need the other stakeholders. We need the registries to be part of the discussion. We need the registrars to be part of the discussion. And if we encounter something that happens in ICANN that we really do not like as government, we can give GAC advice, and well, we will really keep on pushing on that advice if the board intends to take a decision that really doesn't appeal to the GAC. Sorry, that line is
It's terrible sound. If anybody's listening.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I think Milton raises the question, who has the final decision-making capacity? Who is authority upon a certain resource or a certain field? But, you know, I have argued for years, we have a new complexity in the internet world because, and that's why I prefer not only to speak about a multi-stakeholder approach, but also about a holistic approach. Because, you know, in the internet, everything is linked to everything. So it means if you have a purely technical approach, then you should understand that this technical issue has a political, an economic, a social implication. If you have a purely political approach, you should also understand that this political approach has an economic, a social, and a technical implication. So that means it's not only that you need all stakeholders involved, you have to also to broaden your view and to see if you manage one problem, what are the side effects, the unintended side effects, which you have to take into consideration. And insofar, decision-making is only the final element in a longer process, which we have called in ICANN the policy development process, or the PDP. So, and sometimes the PDP is more important than the final decision-making. So that means my home discipline is international law. And certainly making international law is a monopoly for subjects of international law. And only states are subjects of international law. So, but the intergovernmental system which makes internet law today is embedded in a multi-stakeholder environment. That means in the ideal case, the policy is made in a multi-stakeholder process and then rubber stamped by governments who have the final authority to make a decision in a field which is relevant for for governments. And so we have also in the ICANN, which is a private sector corporation, where the BDP is more important than the final decision-making capacity of the board. I was a member of the board, and certainly we were waiting for the PDP coming from the GNSO or the CNSO, and then more or less rubber stamped what came out, from the PDP, which is a multi-stakeholder process. Governments, the Governmental Advisory Committee is involved in the PDP. So, and governmental advice is not legally binding for the board. But if the governments give an advice to the board and the board disagrees, it can disagree, then we have meanwhile a procedure for consultation. Then we have to sit together and to negotiate, what could be the final thing. Sometimes the board wins, sometimes the GAG wins. So, but this is a structure for the management of one piece of the whole internet governance ecosystem. And there are many other pieces where you have a different model. So that's why I avoid the ism, because all this together is certainly, you could call it multi-stakeholderism, but you have also multilateralism. And I, from the very early day, say it's a stupid idea to have multilateralism against multi-stakeholderism. So these are two sides of a coin. So we all are sitting in one boat, and we have to find a way to settle the problems in a bottom-up, open, transparent ways. And these principles, openness, bottom-up, transparencies, are key elements of the multi-stakeholder approach.
I do not agree that multilateralism and multi-stakeholderism are the same or two sides of the same coin. I do think there is a real big difference between multilateral institutions and multi-stakeholder institutions, to be honest, Wolfgang, because in the participation possibilities for stakeholders outside of, for stakeholders in a multilateral institution are much more limited than in multi-stakeholder, as ICANN is. Anyone can register to an ICANN meeting and show up either online, offline, on site, so and start to participate, even though I should say it's quite a difficult process to really understand, and that's something else, but one can go to an ICANN meeting and be there. Maybe for those who don't really know me, besides the brief introduction Milton gave, that I work at the Ministry of Economic Affairs in the Netherlands. I've also been a GAC representative for the Netherlands for the past 3.5 years. So on ICANN, I guess I pretty much I know something. And I'm also one of the MAG members of the IGF. So that's a slight extra introduction.
All right, so that I appreciate your Elisa, because that's one of the things I don't like about the Wolfgang's holistic approach, is that it blurs the lines between multilateralism and sovereignty-based governance and non-sovereignty-based governance by non-state actors. And yeah, there's lots of complex interactions going on in internet governance, as in all forms of global governance. But we really have to be very distinct about who has the ultimate decision-making authority. And in this case, in the case of ICANN, in the case of the regional internet registries, in the case of the IETF, the authority is not in the hands of states, and we don't want it to be in the hands of states. And we have to be very clear that that is the distinguishing feature of these institutions. However much they might get advice from governments or incorporate governmental actors into their systems, it's fundamentally a different source of authority. So now we have some questions, I think, from...
Sorry, may I ask you something? Because do you, I think we all agree that that there isn't that much of a difference between, no, sorry. What I want to say is that you kind of are stating it as if it's very, very important or a very big issue about, how do I say this? so when we take the multi-stakeholder model or internet governance, what you are stating it is, when it comes to the principles, I'm not hearing that much difference. I'm just mainly hearing you stating it differently than Wolfgang is. Most of the things I think you fundamentally do agree upon, and we're having a whole discussion here about if it should be called internet self-governance or if it should be called multi-stakeholder governance. As fascinating as I find this debate, I'd also maybe think we should put some more effort into solving issues that we are trying to deal with in a multi-stakeholder fashion or in ICANN or in the different institutions than so much discussing the model itself, unless we are going to go further into detail on which principles do we find important for the model, so inclusivity, those kind of aspects. That's the much more interesting debate, I think, instead of having a very high level debate on should we call it basically internet self-governance, or should we call it multi-stakeholder model, or should we call it, I don't know, the rodeo model, everything goes. I don't care, but
No, the reason we have to have that conversation is because of the rise of digital sovereignty as a principle or norm in many parts of the world. If you don't understand why global internet governance, the so-called multi-stakeholder model, is a departure from digital sovereignty, from territorial sovereignty of states towards global governance, then you're going to slip in, and the distinctive feature of these institutions is going to be lost. And we're going to go back into a territorially fragmented internet. And frankly, that's where we're going, even in the United States right now. So I think it's very important. It's not an unpractical or sort of academic issue. I think the reason I'm so heated about it is precisely that the rise of this concept of digital sovereignty and the territorialization of data and governance.
Milton, you have to be realistic. And the whole internet revolution did not remove the intergovernmental system or the 193 nation states which are member of the United Nations. So, and what the reality is that the internet is a layered system, and in the wiki we differentiated. It's more complex, but we made it simple and differentiated between the evolution of the internet and the use of the internet, and said the evolution of the internet is mainly the technical layer, and the use of the internet is the application layer, where the majority of the political problems are sitting. So while on the technical layer, you have one world, one internet, because the whole world, including China, Russia, Uruguay, or Argentina, are using the HTTP protocol, the DNS protocol, TCP/IP protocols. So this is universal. But on the application layer, you have 193 member states and 193 jurisdictions. So that means you have a natural conflict between the one world, one internet concept and the one world, 193 jurisdictions concept. And the challenge is to find a way to manage this conflict. Not that the dream is certainly that the technical layer will rule the world, but this is an illusion. And the risk is, what you say, is that the governments will overtake the technical layer and will separate it. But the challenge is, and the multi-stakeholder approach is an instrument which can avoid either or development, neither governmental nor private sector leadership. So that you make arrangements in between where the technical layer and the public policy layer, application layer comes together. I think this is the challenge, and insofar the Sao Paulo multi-stakeholder guidelines are very helpful because they offer criteria where you can say, okay, that you can measure, where what is the specific role of stakeholders in certain concrete fields? So that means we have to move forward, to stumble forward, and not to say, okay, we go back to the 19th, 20th century where we have either the rule of the sovereign state, or we overtake it by the technical community and grab, some of the elements.
If you have read my book on fragmentation, Wolfgang, you would know that I argue that there will never be technical fragmentation. That there's very little risk of technical fragmentation in the sense that the internet protocols and the addressing and naming system of the internet will continue to be globally governed. The problem is, as I said, jurisdictional fragmentation, which is governments imposing different laws, different rules on a territorial basis as an overlay on the global internet. But we can't get into that. I'd like to get some questions from the audience. I think we have Mr. Kato as a question, and there's an online question, I've been told.
Thank you very much for very interesting debates. I'm very curious on some of the points.
Hold it very close to your.
Okay, can you hear me now better? Thank you again, for very interesting debates. I have one particular question to Milton. When you say authority, the government, can you hear me? Yeah, I just want to understand your definition of authority or the government sovereignty and so on. And simply because I'm curious about that distinction. Because, for instance, if you talk about the parliament of the government, the national, well, if under the constitution, if they have the authority, final authority to make laws or to make decisions, the representatives are selected, elected by voters. And if there's a law who says multi-stakeholder should select those representatives, there are some organizations like that, or even institutions where they need some different stakeholder as a part of the board member, which is ICANN. But representation on that kind of decision-making unit of the organization can be the authority in your definition, and that's one place. And also, in some case, in some country, even if law says or constitution says that parliament has a final decision, or and we see many interesting examples of what we call a democracy of decision making. And that's why this concept of multi-stakeholderism may have more complex aspect, I think. It's just a question for you for this interesting debate. Thank you.
I'm not sure how to. I think that was more of an observation than a question. We have a question here too. Yeah, let's collect a bunch of questions and try to answer them. We have online questions too, apparently from Mark Nottingham and Alex Klimberg.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, my name is Honorable Dr. Alpha Abdoulaye Diallo. I'm a president of the Economic and Sustainable Development Committee in Guinean Parliamentary. Guinea is very happy to participate in this workshop. Like other countries, the Guinean Parliamentary has also adopted laws on the establishment the Personal Data Protection Authority. and the law on cyber security. That what is my question now for all the stakeholders? The major problem today, it is the application of the law, because internet criminals are often ahead of the state. What is the experience of your country for this problem? No. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. So question about cyber criminals and whether they're ahead of the law.
We'll move to Alex now online with his question.
What happened to Nottingham?
Hello.
He's gone. Hello, go ahead.
First of all, great to see this symposium come together. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I need to pick up on the comment that was made on the stage last about this might be arguing about labels might not be the best use of our time. And I especially agree with that since the multi-stakeholder term has kind of been the bulwark of the non-state-led internet governance model since 2004 and definitely 2005. I don't really understand Milton's eagerness to abandon something that's worked very well for the non-state internet. Since Milton also went on record with a complete misquotation and misinterpretation of what I actually said, let me reassure everyone, including Milton, I don't think he's against internet institutions. So I think you care deeply about them, which is great. So do I. So the difference maybe be is that I don't think, for instance, ICANN and other institutions represent a private sector run internet governance system. And I don't think that putting the private sector and the civil society and the technical community and academia in the same bucket really helps our cause, which gets me to the point of why these definitions, these arguments about definitions are kind of important in a way as well. Arguing that way, Milton, basically also suggests that there is a private sector domain out there in the world governance system that is only run by the private sector. And I have no knowledge of that. There is no such thing as a private sector only governance model at the moment where national sovereignty doesn't apply in any state or form. What does exist is a civil society or nonprofit-led governance model. And that, for instance, is the case in international humanitarian law. Even though they don't manage resources in a practical context, the International Committee of the Red Cross does have a special state in the international system. So that is something that is only possible if you are non-private sector. If you are private sector, you have no hope in hell removing yourself from national sovereignty, which is one of the reasons why I think we should think very carefully about this rush to abandon multi-stakeholder and talk about a private sector-led internet. Thank you.
So that's all that at the beginning, thought the stakeholder system as state led. If state led, then we don't have much of an argument. All I'm saying is you have to show that. That's one of the main. Then actually, civil society, but sector, they are non-state actors. So that something that we want to avoid that confusion and not non-profits, non-state actors.
It's to the state. That I said multi-stakeholder approach and multilateral approach are sides of one coin. Step. The bilateral system is embedded in a multi-stakeholder environment. So that means governments have a certain final decision-making capacity in the governmental processes. I think this is clear. They are subject of international law, but they will fail if they ignore this multi-stakeholder environment. And here comes my challenge for the future, because this is an ongoing process. That means governments or intergovernmental organization will achieve better results if they open their doors to non-state actors. So this is the real challenge. And then Tayana said 30 years ago, let's say a new quality of a revolution in international law. I think this is the challenge for the future, to change the policy development processes in intergovernmental organizations. And here we need procedures. So that means how state actors can participate reasonable in intergovernmental processes. Unfortunately, we have seen in the Global Digital Compact, there were a lot of multi-stakeholder consultations, but at the end of the day, most of them was more or less ignored. We have the debate in the open-ended working in the first committee of the United Nations General Assembly, where they negotiate cybersecurity, where state actors make comments, but they are ignored. We have this in the cybercrime conventions, where civil society, business made proposals, they were ignored. Why? Because there are no procedures in place. How governments have to handle input from non-state actors. In ICANN, we have a procedure. If governments give advice, then we have a procedure how this advice is handled. And this is my call for the future. We have to develop procedures how intergovernmental organizations deal with input from non-state actors, business, private sector, civil society, technical academic community, and then we can reach better results, because it's not a question between ism, it's not a battle between religions, it's a search for solutions for the people. And I think this is the key driver. And insofar, we should not fight senseless battles because the challenges are too big and we have to collaborate. This is a compromise. This is complicated, but we have to do this. Thank you.
I'll take your question, the question from the person from Guinea. Well, obviously, coming from the Netherlands, we also have dealt with cybercrime issues and them also sometimes being, so one could say, ahead of law or not being caught immediately. Yeah, we also have the GDPR, the data protection law, and many different cybersecurity laws. Most recently, we have the network information security, the NIS2 regulation, which intends to stop cyber criminals. So we have very short time, so I can't really explain it in depth. So what is our experience to catch them? I think it's also really working together within government and with non-state actors. We have different foundations that try to find the criminals as well, besides us from government, and look into who are trusted notifiers to inform you as a government on DNS abuse, for example. We work closely together with our country code top level domain registry, SIDN, and they inform all the different registrars if something bad happens regarding DNS abuse, and have different policies to ensure that the registrars and the registrants are informed that there is, for example, a compromised domain name or a maliciously registered domain name, to take it offline. But it's a whole sector approach, and as a government, you will never ever be able, as solistically, to fight cyber criminals. You need to work together with the whole chain or supply chain, and to ensure that you can catch the cyber criminals. And also internationally, work together with your neighboring countries, or with the whole African Union, and internationally work together with other countries to exchange information. I think it's something you will never be able to do by yourself as a government. You will always be 2 steps, 5 steps, maybe 100 steps behind of the cyber criminals.
Right, if my mic works, I will now thank our panelists. Can you hear me now? Okay. I think we're going to have to bring this to a close. I appreciate your participation. I think it was great. I think we had a very multi-stakeholder approach here. I look forward to continuing this debate in terms of, I do think it's relevant. I think it is something that we have to face, particularly with the tendency to question the role of the state and the private sector and non-state actors in governance. I think that's we have to be very clear about what side of that divide we're on and what are those roles. So with that, we'll bring it to a close, and I'll turn it back over to Jamal.
Drop your message. Thanks. You welcome to stay.
Yeah.
Thanks. No. No. Is it working? Ah, now it's working. Okay, it was only me that couldn't hear me. That was interesting. That was a really stimulating debate. I think that stimulated 4 days of conversation. Unfortunately, we only had 45 minutes, but I want to thank our speakers for that. Hopefully we'll be able to catch them in the audience or in the bitty meeting spaces that I can see.
Thank
the
you.
rest of this. again, but I hope you can find.
Can hear.
You can hear me. Oh. Mind you, if I just say 50%, if you just hear 50% of what I say, I hope you would still understand what I'm trying to get at. We have, as we move it, stages. Had to be online for an on-site conference. I find this. There we go. Now I just got training in how to hold a microphone. This is brilliant. And it's the first time I've actually had to be online for an on-site conference. It's this is a cyborg reality coming true for me. But anyway, we're moving on. We have a panel of two speakers. First of all, I'm delaying slightly because our second speaker is entering the building, I believe, but I think that she probably won't make it for Monica's first talk. So I will pass the floor swiftly now to Monica Stachon, who is going to talk about cyberspace as a new sphere of oppositional struggle. I think we'll already have interesting, she's Monica's being a photographer for the moment. I think you can see that online, but let me bomb their photo. There you go. Right. Monica will be presenting to you her work in progress that is about cyberspace as a new sphere of oppositional struggle. And she's giving the case of Iran for this. We look forward to your interesting presentation. Monica, the floor is yours. You will need the mic.
But this one or
this is fine.
Okay.
For this one, right? Hold it properly. And you say to me, please.
Yes. It will be broken because I can't hear you.
Yeah. Oh shit.
Yes. Okay. Wait. Okay. So it was my pleasure to talk about some research I've done recently, because my area of research is the cybersecurity, cyber terrorism, and countering cyber terrorism of Iran. But as of today's talk, I will talk some. Okay, thank you. Okay, so today we were talking about cyberspace as a new sphere of opposition case of Iran. So what's in the agenda, you can see. Briefly going forward. On September 2022, Iran's morality police detained 22-year-old Kurdish woman Mahsa Amini on charges on violating the law on the proper wearing of the hijab. Actually, the latest tests are at once similar to, but also different from previous protests, because the detaining Amini led to public approval and marked the beginning of a wave of agitation that swept across the country. So when we're talking about the latest protest, the form of the protest had been changing. With the advent of new technologies, protesters are increasingly using social media to express themselves and their views. Internet is becoming a fighting the oppressive government. So actually, the wave of most recent discontent was unleashed only on surface by the mandatory hijab wearing laws. It was caused by the brutality of regime itself. Are these protests the struggle for basic rights in Iran has actually been more than 30 years. I mean, it's 17, and the latest protest we have 2022. So you can see that the struggle is on. One of the biggest milestones in the struggle for, yes? Okay, thank you. Okay. One of the biggest milestones of the fight for women's rights or human rights in general was 2009. We are now witnesses of the digital revolution. We are entering new sphere of struggle, which is cyberspace. And the importance of cyberspace began to grow during the protest following the 2009 elections and immediately after. It was in these alternative public spaces that Iranians began to live lives that more fully represented who they were. And of course, the importance of cyberspace as an alternative space to fight the oppressive government is even more apparent during this protest in 2022. And it is possible to distinguish at least 5 functions that social media or internet or cyberspace in general currently performing for Iranian activists. You can see the virtual public space, the informatic documentative function, the social mobilization function, the communication and strengthening international solidarity. Briefly, I can talk about some of them. The most obvious use of cyberspace, of course, is to report on taking place in public spaces, to spread information in general about place, time, and to gain social recognition of the protests. And the second function is spreading information on the new forms of this content. One of the best known examples is, of course, My Selfie Freedom. You can know that name. It was an online movement started in 2014 by Masih Alinejad. She created a Facebook page where women post photos of themselves without headscarves. Another one was the silent solidarity protest of Vida Mohaved, who in 2017 climbed onto some kind of electrical box, took off her headscarf, and stick it to wave it like a flag. And of course, without the internet and without the cyberspace, probably no one would ever have paid attention to this girl, to her protest, and the photo of the young Iranian who took off her headscarf went viral all or around the, for example, TikToks, Instagram, and so on. Was white. And the situation, of course, is also important if we are talking about social mobilization and the documentary function, the documentary function, because Iran is a huge informational bubble. The content which is distributed through official channels must be consistent with the official government message. So the formal message to the world media is therefore based what authorities wanted to say. Iranians therefore try to document any actions in other ways. For example, TikToks, Instagram posts, Twitter posts, so on. And also public space. It is really really important because Iranians have begun to express their views in an extremely artistic way. We can you can see the examples here. Anti-regime activity has largely moved into the digital sphere, where when we have freedom to create, publish what you want to. And of course, we also have the last one, which is the last one function, which is gaining international recognition and solidarity. You can see the examples of the people who are protest against the Iranian regime all around the world. Yes, it's Italy, Greece, all around the world, in the different countries. Of course, the action have to have reaction. So how does the government respond to social discontent in cyberspace? Signs of the post-revolutionary Iranian government's recognition of the importance of cyberspace were evident as soon as 2003, when new organizational structures for cybersecurity were created. But few years later, in 2009, the role and importance of the digital sphere for the government increased. And we have two main factors. It was the Stuxnet attack and the protest after the presidential elections. And how the government, how the government combating social discontent in internet. Of course, we can say in multiple ways. They try to suppress the activists in the cyberspace. One of the form of restrictions on freedom of expression used by the authorities is to control information in online public spheres. The one example is cyber attacks. In 2016, for example, the Instagram account of musician Shaheen Najafi was hacked, and the perpetrators changed his biography and replaced his profile picture with the flag of Islamic Republic of Iran. A relatively effective way for the Iranian government to deal with outbreaks of public discontent is through mass internet shutdowns. There are several types of network shutdowns, from massive, national, to local, and to only selected spheres. Research shows that between 2010 and 2022, 8 instances of network capacity cuts in Iran, which 2 of which were the most significant. One of them during the Arab Spring, and the second one during the protest, the latest, more recent protest after the death of Mahsa Amini. And then we have much more precise, sophisticated tools to control the public. And we have something like CM. The Intercept published a report revealing evidence that Iran possesses spyware, which is the CM, and uses it to track, control its own citizens. And you can see that the program offers nearly 30 different functions, and the most important of them was, for example, limiting data speeds of the phone, collection of metadata, obtain billing, obtain information on special services used by the users, such as VPN, analyze all of users' contact, tracking the locations, and so on and so on. And last but not least, the biggest part of my research recently it was an analysis of 55 advanced persistent threat groups that are operate on behalf of Iranian government. And as you can see, the sizable portion of Iran's offensive cyber activities are related to surveillance of its own citizens. You can see the invigilations in here. It's about 20% of of the whole operations in cybersphere by Iranian government. And of course, the cyber surveillance refers to the tracking of the activities of individuals whose actions are perceived as dangerous to the national interest of Iran. And you can see also that we have Iran in here, and also 13 of the 55 organizations conduct malicious cyber activities, which are aimed at activists, oppositionists, dissidents, as they called by the government. And of course, the sectors that are most attacked. Here you can see the NGOs and the activists of Iran. So to sum up, we can see that the digital sphere has become major venue both for Iranian citizens who contest the social, economic, political situations in the country, and to countering this activity by government. The government has developed extensive control mechanism. We can say internet censorship, mass network shutdowns. We can say the CM system, the Iran national intranet also, and other one. And to sum up, cyberspace has become a tool of a Iranian government in suppressing internal opposition, and also the place, the sphere when the oppositional struggle has begun and has continued through last 15 years. So thank you very much. I hope it was, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Monica. Whilst we wait for our final speaker, it's my job to ask you some difficult questions. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for submitting this paper. It was a very interesting read. You went into quite a bit of the overall history. I thought this was very, very useful for the reader as they went through the paper, trying to understand things, looking at the context from 2003 onwards, right? So really addressing those kinds of issues. What I also thought was interesting was this kind of reflection that you have on the idea of the internet as this virtual public space that crosses many boundaries, that allows many boundaries to be crossed, and also operates not in the kind of the territorial means, although here we see the interposition of territoriality and the community of activists, in your case, that actually exist. There was, you show very much how this one particular state is trying to implement certain rules that are seen in a way as being kind of contextual to that particular culture, that particular territory. And you're seeing how there is then this clash between the non-spatial and the spatial in this sense. And I find that a really interesting space to look at, particularly because that kind of gives or affords a lot of freedoms to people to then feel that they are beyond the boundaries of sovereign control, to then carry out sort of these different types of discussions or these different types of acts. I had a couple of really kind of concrete questions about the work. So you talked about the SME, right? you'd said that it was going to be, or it was foreseen as being operational. I think from what we've seen in other regions of the world, there are also challenges to developing something that is completely fail-proof, secure in that sense. And I think that, you know, maybe that's one angle, just trying to impose locked doors on people that doesn't actually work. But anyway, okay, you know, I wanted to know if that was operational in your sense. I also wanted to know, is there like, as there is a transnational community of activists, wanted to know what kind of the relationships were between the members of the community that you mentioned, or the communities, the artists, the groups, and those in different regions of the world. Are they sharing insights? Are they, you know, organizing along? Are there certain models that they are following, that they are replicating from other parts of the world? And similarly, for the enforcers, are there networks there? Is the software and the hardware that empowers the SME, is that then something that's been developed in other parts of the world? And actually, it would be interesting to know which parts of the world it was, and if it was maybe some of those spaces where we've cherished the free internet in it, or our type of internet in a different way. So I'd like to know more about these networks that lie behind these things. I'd also like to know, you're talking a lot about state control here, right? But there is also state control via proxy, right? I think Mesa's talk was also talking about platform governance, right? There are ways to control these platforms in different ways, and actually getting the platforms to control themselves, right? I mean, you see how it works with Apple in China, for example, limiting the things that are sold on the App Store, right? You also see how that kind of thing happens in Europe as well, right? We just call it regulation in Europe, and where it's not in Europe, we call it something else. I think that's a very important point to bear in mind as well, right? Finally, so no, the control by platforms or by corporate means, and so on. I think that's an important aspect to raise in this paper. Finally, I wanted to just bring your attention. You've heard that Sophie earlier on was talking about digital sovereignty. You've heard Milton referring to the concept. You might have heard me also talking about it at some point. I'm wondering, to what extent is a lot of the actions that take place here that seem to you, at least my assumption is that you find this to be not a desirable state of play, right? Playing against the virtual public space. But how much of this is legitimated or legitimized by a digital sovereignty discourse that in fact the rest of the world is now kind of jumping upon and saying we all need digital sovereignty? And then you can have a country like this one that would turn around and say, well, yeah, so do we. And our digital sovereignty relies on imposing our norms and values that are within our territorial sovereignty, right? And how does that play out? So I think those are interesting discussions that might tie in to what you've been doing, right? That might actually contextualize this across a broader sense. And I think that that's one of the recommendations. I know you're focusing on this one case. We'd also like to see what kind of networks, what kind of experiences are brought around the world, around the virtual free space that is the internet, that play into this kind of thing, this kind of story. So those are my questions. Do you want a couple of minutes to respond while we wait for Yik-Chan to appear? Okay. Maybe you want to stay there, hide behind your computer so you don't have to, but I'll come over with the microphone. Okay. And thanks very much for your presentation as well.
Hearing myself, so yeah. Okay, so SME, of course, it refers to a lot, which can be translated in the Iranian intranet or national internet service. And the plans to create an internal national network actually Back to 2011, I think. SME project of 3 main phases, which were initially scheduled 16, but of course we can see that now the intranet is only about, I don't know, 60-70% ready, and the first phase was concluded where to separate local and international internet traffic. Second phase, which involved, for example, moving the hosting all of the Iranian web servers, is partly done, and the third phase, which is which have to be which have to have domestic developed applications and services begin to operating. We can see that Iranian government have the ability to build additional software. For example, the operating systems, the email services, and the different kind of software which government is building right now. Basically, 60-70% of the project is done. Of course, the government said that by spring 2024 it should be fully completed, but you know, we're entering the 2025 and it is not done. Okay. The second question, probably about the government of platforms. Yeah. Yes, actually, in Iran, it is prohibited to access the platforms like Facebook, like Twitter, Instagram, X, and so on. But of course, Iranians are highly sophisticatedly good at bypassing this law, this prohibition, and they're using VPNs and different kind of tools to access the platforms. And you can see from the examples I showed on my presentation that they really doing great on this platform. And the case of international networks, I think you mentioned. Actually, there is no networks between Iranians. I mean, the Iranians are all around the world, and they're changing their views, exchanging their views, but probably there is no such network which is connecting the dots all around the world. And of course, the last question about the digital sovereignty imposing values on this place. It is for me hard to place the Iran in the digital sovereignty discussion, because as you can see, as you can know, it is a state where you cannot predict what will be in the future, and the tools of governance of platforms and the cyberspace is developing. And actually, there is no, for example, known strategy of cyberspace, of cyber, I don't know, cyber security. So we can only predict on the base of activities the government is taking. So we cannot tell what will be the behavior in space in future. Yeah, so basically that is.
Thanks very much. Does anybody else have a comment or a question for Monica? Then we'll move on to our next presentation. Yikchan is approximately 800 meters away. But she's stuck in a queue for a badge. This is so we
Yes, sorry. Yeah, sorry, I'm
we've got
still in the badge
Yikchan.
collection point.
So Yikchan will
Okay, I have
take
to.
over the presentation now.
Yeah, sorry, everybody. Yeah,
Oh no.
I'm in the badge collection point. Okay, I haven't been able to collect my badge, so yeah, I have to do my presentation online. And sorry, so can I share my screen?
I'll pass the floor over to you.
Yeah.
Please, Yikchan, we have 10 minutes, okay? Because we've been told that we have to leave at 45.
Okay.
Okay. So you have
Okay,
8
good.
minutes for presentation and 2 minutes
Yes,
for
thank
questions.
you. Yeah. Can you see? Can you see my screen? Okay, so my presentation is about the right to data portability and so the rules, narrative, and the implementation. And so this presentation is about right to data. So this presentation includes 5 parts. First of all, I would like to talk about data portability and the research questions and RTPT in Chinese scholarship and the right to data protection in law and the implementation of the RTDP in China. So I think I'm going to skip the detail about right to data portability. So basically, the right to data portability is a digital right introduced by the EU in the GDPR, which have 2 key elements. One is the right to data subject to obtain a copy of personal data from the data controller. The second is the right to transfer the data from one data controller to the other. So this is an important right for 3 reasons. The first reason is about self-control, self-determination of your personal information. The second is a mechanism to prevent unfair competition and the market data from the manipulations of the data market. So to prevent kind of the to prevent the monopoly power to improve the competition in the market. So that's why they introduced this right to data portability in the GDPR. And but there are some 2 conditions to restrict the right. The first one is for the public interest. The second one is to allow to do not affect the right and the freedom of others. So the research question actually is about how has the right to data portability been protected in China, and what specific condition actually shaped the regulation and the development of this right. So first of all, I would like to look at so that's for some reason, you know, I choose these topics, but I try to skip this because we do not have much time. And also the methodology I used in this research, they have 2 methods. The first, the primary data we collected through the interviews. So we conducted 8 semi-structured interviews with different stakeholders affected by the RTBT. And secondly, we did a 6-month participatory interview observation in a Chinese food delivery platforms. And secondly, we used some secondary data. So this is the method we used. So first of all, we look at the Chinese scholarship in terms of how do they shape the discussion of the right to portability, the data portability. So there's a positive view and a negative view. And the negative view, so I would like to look at the negative view. Basically, the negative view is they do not think there's some the right to data portability does not meet the condition to become a basic right in China, and should be regarded as a goal to strive instead of the right. And the secondly also is that they think that if they want to adapt this right in China, it has to be localized, but they have some difficulty to implement because there's a concern of the privacy, intellectual property right, and the copyright issues. So this is the scholarship. Basically, they think there's if you want to localize the right to data portability, there's a difficulty in terms of the technical difficulty, also the legal difficulties. And so we need so therefore I want to conduct the in-depth analysis of the cases and explore what are the real difficulties, why they think it is difficult. So this is the reason I start to do this research. Okay, just this. And so the next slide is sorry. So the example I used is a food delivery platform in China. So which integrate more than 60 services such as a food delivery, taxi, hotel, and all other service to provide users with live service products. So they collect different type of personal data from the users. So that's why we choose this big case study, because they're the kind of leading food delivery platforms, as we mentioned. So actually, they also have a personal. The platform also have a privacy policy. So they can. So the data they collect has to be protected by the law, according to the law. So what kind of data they collect, including this here. So these are the personal data they collected, like a personal basic information, personal identity information, network identity information, personal financial information, personal health and physiological information, and the content and extras. Okay, so so this is the information they collected. And secondly, so this is a Chinese, but I can translate to you. So how the data has been processed by the platform. So this is a circle. So first of all, we have this user, then this is a data, this is a service. So they the platform collect the data from the user to here. So this is a data storage. So this is platform A, and this is the platform B. Actually, this is the platform A is the for the deliver platform, and they share the data to platform B. You know? So how do they share it? They transfer the data from here to here, okay? So we can see the data is collected from the user to the data storage in platform A, then collected, transferred to the platform B. So this is how do they collect the data by the food delivery platform, but they also share the data with the second platform. So how do they, so this is a collection, data collection and the process. So they collect, store it, use and process, transmit, and also disclosures. So when they collect the data, when they process data, they also do the kind of encryptions. Also, is according to the scope it involved. It can divide it into derive the data of the specific object and derive the data of non-specific object. Of course, we can discuss this, the difference between the specific object and the non-specific object. And also they classify the data according to different confidentialities and the importance. So they have this kind of the classification that of their data. So there's a no restriction, restricted, confidential, top secret. So according to different category of the data and different, they have a different authorization requirement. So who can access to data? So this is how the food delivery platforms, they classify the data and how do they do the security and the encryptions as well. So the most important thing is about the transfer and the data sharing. How do they transfer the data and share the data with the third parties? So basically, the transmission of data will be based on the data encryption, storage, and in a security manner, such as using a secured transmission protocol using data transmission tools. And if the data has to be exported, it should be evaluated by dedicated data security teams, okay, under the permission, also comply with national law and regulations. So if there's a third party wants to transfer the data, so they have to they have to also pass this we call the data outbound assessment by the platforms. So there's a kind of security, checked and the compliance procedure for the platform to export the data to the third party. But there's a more important thing, there's a shared process, the joint process and user information. Because, for example, there's the advertising partner or insurance company, they have to share the data. Not only share, but also join the process the data with the food delivery platforms. So how do they do that? So they have the kind of cooperative process of data processing. First of all, they have to sign agreement with the joint process. Okay, and secondly, they also have to pass the security methods, inform the user of the purpose. Yeah, sorry. Hello?
We need to stop you now, if that's possible, because we would like to give 1 minute for asking questions, and we really have to leave the room at 1:45.
Okay.
So, thank you. Are there any questions from people? Are there any questions? Anyway, we're at 1:45 now. You can hear me, right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, thanks very much. I mean, for me personally, it's really interesting to look at the Chinese model. We often, at least in my field in Europe, we don't often hear about the intricacies of the Chinese models for these particular laws and interactions. So it's really useful for us to get an insight into that. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. Since you'll be here, I would encourage anybody who wishes to reach out to Yigchan to please feel free to do so. You can see her in the top right. That's what she looks like. So you'll bump into her, I'm sure, at other events throughout the conference. Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to hear all these presentations and to participate in some of the discussions around this. I'm very excited for the rest of the event. It sounds like it's a real fair, so there's going to be quite some things to do around here if you're here. If you were online, I noticed and recognized some people who are sitting in North America right now. Well, please enjoy your sleep. Get back to sleep.